Good morning and welcome to New Burlington United Methodist Church. My name is Ed Armantrout and I'm the pastor here. Scripture I want to use today is from Matthew chapter 5 verses 1 through 12. When Jesus saw the crowds, he went up to the mountain. After he sat down, his disciples came to him and he began to speak and taught them, saying, Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be filled. Blessed are the merciful, for they will receive mercy. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they will see God. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called children of God. Blessed are those who are persecuted for the sake of righteousness, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are you when people revile you and persecute you and utter all kinds of evil things against you falsely on my account. Rejoice and be glad, for your reward is great in heaven. For in the same way they persecuted the prophets who were before you. So I call this the Sermon on the Mount, and I talked a little bit about the Sea of Galilee last week in the sermon, but they have a chapel church they built at the top of the north end of the Sea of Galilee where they believe this took place. And it's a pretty good slope down to the sea, and so it's kind of a natural amphitheater-like place to sit there, and it's just kind of really peaceful, and it's still beautiful, and there's really not much around there. If they hadn't built this church chapel thing at the top, there's really nothing around there. So I think the Sermon on the Mount, we have trouble understanding it, and I think part of it has to do with the way things are interpreted from Greek and Aramaic to English. And so what I want to do today is we're going to kind of break them down by topics and then go through, and what I want to do is talk a little bit about when we just read them what we might think they mean, but try to give you a better background so you can understand the meaning from the original writings. So we'll begin with verses 1 and 2. Seeing the crowds, he went up the mountain and he sat down. His disciples came to him, and he opened his mouth and taught them, saying. So in a rabbi setting, a lot of times there'd be a lot of chit-chat and visiting, but when the rabbi sat down, that means we were getting to the teaching time. And if you think about these different verses we're going to talk about, they don't really exactly go together. It's like 9 different things that he's talking about here. So there's some thought that maybe these weren't really all done at one time, the way we picture it, and they were done separately, and then they were put together as one subject. And we don't really know, and I'm just trying to give you some background in case you've ever wondered why they don't seem to go together. So just so you know. The other thing that when he says he opens his mouth, what that was is it was the beginning of his official beginning of the sermon. So you knew it was going to be something really important that he was going to say, and the whole idea here is you're going to pour out from your heart and your soul what you're going to share, in this case, with his disciples. For anyone else doing a message, you should really be sharing your heart and soul anytime you give a message, because you want to give it your all, and that's what we're hearing. So verse 3. Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Now, I think that we truly don't understand this verse at all, because I think almost all of us, and maybe it's just because we're from the United States or because of the time we live in, when we hear the word poor, we're thinking about monetary. And that's not really what the intent was here. So I'm going to try to explain this, and I'm going to do it like in 3 parts. So they were poor, not necessarily because they didn't have money, but they probably really were lacking cash. But they were poor because they had no influence, power, or prestige. Therefore, since you didn't have any of that stuff, had no influence, you were likely to be downtrodden and oppressed. And therefore, because of that, you had to put your whole trust in God, because that was the only way for you to be, because you didn't have anything. And when I say didn't have anything, I mean literally you didn't have anything. And we're going to talk about this again later. Sometimes we think when people are poor or thirsty, we do it in the terms of what we see in the United States. And if you've ever had the opportunity to travel somewhere around the world, you get to see what poor really is. And so I just think we sort of misunderstand this whole verse because we look at it in terms of monetary, and I hope that makes you think about it in a different way. Blessed are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted. So mourn here can have a couple different ways of thinking about it. It could be you're sad for the loss of something in the world, or you can be sad for a personal loss. So either one of those could be mourning. Maybe a better way to think of this is, blessed are those who are in desperate sorrow terms for their own sin and their unworthiness. So it's more understanding a lack of what we have personally, and not necessarily a mourning for the loss of someone or for something that happened sad in the world. Verse 5, blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. Now, part of the problem here is the way that meek was used then and the way that meek is used now is not the same. So for us, we believe meek to be a weakness. It means you're not as strong or sturdy as you are, kind of a meal toast, you get ran over. And so that's the way we think of meekness. That's not really what meek meant 2,000 years ago. So the whole idea of being meek then was it had to do with anger or madness. And so the question is, can you be angry and mad appropriately? So let me give you an example. If you think about, I was reading about civil rights issues in the 60s this weekend. And if you think about that, there were people that just weren't treated right, treated fairly. And so if you became angry about the way those people were being treated, whoever they were, and that made you mad and you went out and made a change in the world, that is an appropriate amount of anger. If you get angry because somebody cuts you off in the traffic lane driving, and you decide that either you're going to hit them or you're going to drive up behind them 100 miles an hour or pull out a gun and shoot at their car, that is an inappropriate amount of anger. And so this meek shall inherit the earth is really about anger and an appropriate amount of anger. So I kind of rewrote this and had, with the help of the commentary, I said, blessed are those who are angry at the right time and never at the wrong time. Probably could have also added, blessed are those who are just angry enough, but not too angry. And so I hope that helps you understand that. 6 is, blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they shall be satisfied. So this thirst for righteousness, I don't think very many of us understand, because in our lives, we may be hungry, but we're not really, really hungry. And we may be thirsty, but we're very seldom really, really thirsty, because we don't lack for things the way that people 2,000 years ago lacked. In the Palestine area, if you got meat, it was likely to be once a week. We talk about people who live paycheck to paycheck. When we talk about a denarius, which is the way they were paid, that was literally one day's wage. And so people got paid every day, and there's some scripture where it talks about making sure that people get paid for a day's work. It's because if you didn't pay them that day, that means they didn't have anything that night to eat because they didn't have any money. They literally didn't have any money. And so this idea of longing for something because that's all you've got, we don't understand very well, because we just don't, not very many of us, at least in the United States, deal with that kind of hunger and thirst that they're talking about here. So a better way to say this might be, blessed are those who hunger and thirst for a whole of righteousness, for complete righteousness. So they're not just wanting to be, if you think of it in terms of food or water, they're not trying to be just barely satisfied or to fill a very small void of hunger and thirst. Think of it in terms of an ocean of righteousness, trying to be that complete and make everything the way it should be. 7 are blessed are the merciful, shall they receive mercy. I think this one's a little harder to understand, and so I'm going to talk about when Jesus goes and sees Mary, not Mother Mary, but his friend, and one of them is busy making the meal, and the other lady is just really kind of doting on him, for lack of a better term. And the one doing all the fixing gets mad because she's doing all the work. Well, Jesus really didn't need her to be around him and doing the food and making the house and getting all the guests. He just needed some peace. It was just before he was going to go into Jerusalem, and so he just really needed peace. And so this being merciful, sometimes it's not that you're not kind, it's that you were kind because that's what you thought the person wanted, but you weren't really paying attention to what the person needed. So the whole idea here is, how can you get to know that person better? Now, so this is from a man's point of view, because what men try to do often is we want to fix things. So someone will tell us a story, and then the whole time they're telling the story, all we're thinking about is, how can we fix that? How can we fix that? How can we fix that? So one of the best things I ever learned in college was my wife, who hopefully won't see this, she sometimes starts telling me something, and I think she wants me to fix it. But over time, and we've been married 35 or 36 years now, I've figured out she doesn't really want me to fix it. She wants me to listen to the story. Now, it took me forever to figure that out, but I was having a class one time at Ball State, and I can't remember the professor's name, but it wasn't that long ago. You'd think I could remember. And he got to talking about this, fixing things, or when people really want you to listen. And when he was talking about it in class, I thought, that is what my wife does to me. And so now when she starts telling me a story, and I'm thinking it's about fixing something, I just ask her, is this something I'm supposed to fix at the end, or are you just telling me a story that I'm supposed to listen to? And she'll tell me which it is, which makes life much easier for me, because then I'm not trying to be merciful in the wrong way. Because what happens is, if you're merciful in the way that the person doesn't want it, all you do is make them mad. That's what this is trying to tell us. So you're going to be kind in the right way because you've taken the time to really know the person. And you, kind of the way I described it, is you want to be inside them so that you know their person, you know what they're really looking for, and we're not so hasty to just try to guess what it is. You can tell when you're usually doing this, because if somebody's talking, if you're thinking the whole time about how I'm going to fix this or the next thing I'm going to say, then you're not being merciful, because you've already decided what the answer is, or you're formulating your answer and you're not really listening to them. 8, blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. Now, part of this is pure, what you think pure means. And so a lot of times we think it to mean clean. 2,000 years ago, it could have also meant maybe a better translation was purged of any discontent, so you were happy with your life. And you can think of it in terms of purity. So it's not always great to, define a word with the same word, but if you think of water in terms of just being water and not having other stuff in it. When we think of gold, real gold is pretty soft. For it to be hard, other things have had to be added to it, so that pure gold is really soft. And so when you say pure, you're trying to be 100% whatever that is. And so what this is really talking about is, what are our motives behind what we're saying or doing? And so sometimes, when I was working all the time, you would have, at the bank, you would have people come in and they're telling you a story, and clearly they're wanting you to do something. But if you'd had different experiences with them, you might catch yourself going, what is the real angle here? What are we really trying to get to? What are their motives to get me to do this or to not do this, as the case may be? That's what they're talking about here. It's, are are your motives such that you're not trying to do it because you're trying to get a more powerful position? Are you not doing something because you want to become more important? Are you not doing it because you don't want the publicity that comes with doing whatever people see you do? So it has to do with our personal motives. What are the real reasons we're doing something? And what this is saying is, if you can have that pure heart, if you're doing good, you're just doing good because you want to do good. If you do something for somebody, you're not expecting something back from them. You're not expecting them to do something for you. You're not expecting a monetary reward. And when you do those things just because they're the right things to do and you want to do them, then you're going to see God. God will be visible, if you want to think of it in terms of a transaction, in that transaction or that moment that those things happen. Now, this one might be the hardest one for people to understand. It's, blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called the sons of God. So, peace and Jewish, they use shalom. So let's talk about what peace really means. Peace is not the absence of violence. So get that out there. When they talk about peace or shalom here, what they're saying is they want everything to come to you that makes you the best good, which if I have any English teachers that don't listen to that part. So it's all good things that could come to you, come to you. And so we don't really think of peace in that way. We have a tendency to think of it more in terms of conflict, war, that kind of things. And just because you're a peacemaker doesn't mean you're a peace lover. So for example, you might not like the conflict that comes for creating a disturbance, but that didn't mean you didn't help create the disturbance. And so I hope you understand that difference. So there's kind of three things that I took from this. You could be a peacemaker in terms of trying to make the world a better place to live in. Nothing wrong there. If you go back and, because we're not that far from Christmas, go back and look a lot of the Christmas hymns. A lot of them talk about peace. And I've always thought, and I think I've changed my mind after this week, but I've always thought that they were really talking about a personal peace and inner peace. So think of it in terms of peace in your own heart or in your own soul. But after studying this last week or so, I've kind of changed my mind here. The last thing they talked about was peace, was establishing right relationship with others. And maybe that's a better definition of peace, because even if you go, well, that's just you and somebody else. Well, the issue is, if it's you and somebody else and you and somebody else and everybody is the somebody else, then when you think of peace in terms of not having conflict or war arguments, it sort of takes care of it. And it also means you don't have to not like the confrontations that take place, but it also means you're not the one stirring the pot before the confrontation happens. And so maybe that establishing a right relationship with others is a better way to look at being a peacemaker. And so I hope that helps you understand that. And then the last three verses, I'll read to you. It's 10 through 12. Blessed are those who are persecuted for righteous sakes, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are you when others revile you and persecute you and utter all kinds of evil against you falsely on my account. Rejoice and be glad, for your reward is great in heaven, for so they persecuted the prophets who were before you. So we have this prosecution that's gone on, this people treating us poorly because of our beliefs. Now, we just don't see that very often, not in the United States. There are other parts of the world where that happens, but it does not, very seldom happens here. And so I've got sort of 5 different thoughts of what that persecution might look like. So some of it's 2,000 years ago, but some of it also applies for today. So one of the things was, if you're persecuted against, it means you might not be able to do your work. Well, 2,000 years ago, and you can look in the Old or New Testament and see examples as people got away from those false gods. There were people that tried to harm them, not so much because of the religious beliefs, but because they affected their ability to earn money. So in Acts, there is a story about people in the city, and they had a god, and the town basically made their money because they were silversmiths, tinsmiths, and they made little statues of their god, and they sold it to people. And when Paul comes to town and he says, hey, that artifact is not the real God, it hurts their business. And so they're trying to drive him out of town, not because they don't believe in what he's saying, but because he thinks it hurts them financially. We still see that go on today, where people make a decision, whether it's accurate or not, that they're going to put an end to some business because of their beliefs. And so that persecution still goes on today. It can affect your social life. Now, not so much here, but 2,000 years ago, if you were known to be a Christian and you were from a Jewish family, it was not unlikely that the dad would just say, you're dead to him, and you were just completely driven from the home. And so that home life, social life, kind of put those two together. And the same for home. You could have these divisions in homes because part of the family believed in Christianity, part of them was still Jewish or didn't have any faith, and so then you see these conflicts. Part of the persecution was because of what I would say are falsehoods about beliefs. And so when you go back and you read the Lord's Supper, and when it says, take, eat, this is my body, there were some thoughts 2,000 years ago that they were cannibals. And so the whole idea of being a cannibal meant they were going to be persecuted against because people didn't understand what they were saying. And sometimes beliefs still today, and I said this a little bit earlier in a slightly different way, you have conflict in families because some of the families believe and some don't. And so you have husbands or wives that want to go to church or don't want to go to church because they have belief. So you end up with these conflicts all the time between family, and so you have a form of persecution because of their beliefs one way or the other. And the last thing in this part is there's some political persecution. So it's a little unclear how many people, how many Christians Romans had killed. When we spent time in Italy and we were in Rome for a while and this conversation came up, it is just not clear if it was a lot of people or not so many people. And so whether it was one or thousands, I don't think it matters, because that's not really what the point of the story was. The political part of this was Caesar and the rulers before and after him in Rome believed them to be a god. And so if they were a god, you couldn't believe in Jesus Christ as the Son of God because he wasn't the son of Caesar. And so those conflicts where Christians were persecuted against were really political, because Caesar wanted everybody to know that he was number one. And if you didn't think he was number one, then you were a threat to him. And Christians that were killed, a lot of times it was simply because they wouldn't say that Caesar was God. And so we can say, well, gosh, that would be easy to do. Well, we're not the ones putting our lives on the line. And so in the world we live in now, you can't be sure if you're in a different part of the country that might come up. And so I would caution you not to be too quick to just say, well, I don't know why they gave in to him. Well, you don't know what you do in that spot either. We'd like to think we do the right thing. We like to think we have beliefs that are strong enough to get us through no matter what's going on. But until you're there, you don't know. But I just wanted you to understand what that persecution may have looked like in those different ways. So I hope that helps you understand the Beatitudes a little bit better. Again, I think a lot of the issues, when we just read them in the English that we see them in now, it just makes them, we just look at the English word and we think of peace. We just decide it's an absence of violence. Or we think of mourn, it means we're sad for the loss of someone in our lives and others. And if you really can think through what those words meant 2,000 years ago and the way they got translated, I hope that helps you understand them better. Our services are at 9 o'clock every Sunday morning. We have Sunday school for both children and adults that follow at about 10:15. On Ash Wednesday, there'll be a service at Avondale and New Burlington share me as a pastor. So we're going to have an Ash Wednesday service at Avondale. That is Wednesday, the 22nd, I believe. And that service will be at 6 p.m. See you next week.